The storm had already been raging for hours when Dr. Eleanor Smith sealed herself inside the descent capsule. Above her, the research vessel Helios rose and fell violently against the black Atlantic, rain hammering its steel deck with relentless force, lightning briefly illuminating the cranes and cables that guided her capsule toward the water. 5 voices crackled calmly through her headset, the surface crew maintaining a rehearsed professionalism that contrasted sharply with the chaos outside. Eleanor focused on her instruments, on procedure, on data. This was not her first descent, but it was the deepest she had ever attempted alone. The target lay nearly 4,000 meters below, scattered across the ocean floor like a grave no one had ever truly finished burying. The wreck of the RMS Titanic. Officially mapped, endlessly documented, and yet still profoundly misunderstood. As the capsule disengaged from the ship and began its slow descent, the sounds of the storm faded, replaced by the muted groan of pressure and the soft hum of internal systems. The ocean closed around her like a living thing, swallowing light within minutes. By the time she passed 1,000 meters, the world above felt theoretical, a memory rather than a reality. Her breath sounded too loud inside the helmet, each inhale measured, deliberate, as if excess emotion might somehow increase the pressure outside. The surface crew guided her gently, their voices steady, reassuring, feeding her depth readings and sonar updates. Everything was nominal. And yet, Eleanor felt it almost immediately. Not fear, not panic, but a subtle dissonance, a sensation of moving through something thicker than water, as if the ocean itself resisted her presence. The capsule's external lights cut through the darkness in narrow cones, revealing nothing but drifting particles, marine snow falling endlessly like ash. At 2,000 meters, the first anomaly appeared on her sonar. A faint distortion, broad and undefined, not matching any known geological formation. The crew dismissed it as interference, a layering artifact caused by thermal gradients. Eleanor accepted the explanation, logged it, and continued downward. But the distortion remained, growing clearer as she descended, not resolving into shape but into absence, an area where sonar returns simply vanished. By the time she reached 3,000 meters, her instruments began to behave strangely. Internal clocks lagged by fractions of seconds. Depth readings corrected themselves too aggressively, as if anticipating errors before they occurred. She mentioned it to the surface, her voice calm, professional. They acknowledged it, promised recalibration once she reached the target zone. The Titanic emerged slowly from the darkness, its broken silhouette revealed piece by piece, an enormous wound resting on the seabed. The bow stood upright, eerily intact, while the stern lay shattered in the distance, a reminder of violence frozen in time. Eleanor felt the familiar weight of acetylene in her chest. This place was not merely historical. It was oppressive. The capsule hovered as instructed, maintaining distance, cameras recording, sensors sampling. Then the lights flickered. Just once. The surface crew noticed it immediately, voices overlapping as they checked power integrity and signal strength. Everything read normal. Eleanor assured them she was fine, though she couldn't explain why her hands had tightened around the controls. She rotated the capsule slightly, angling the lights toward the gap between the bow and the darkness beyond. Something reflected the light. Not metal. Not silt. It was movement, slow and deliberate, retreating just beyond the beam's reach. Her sonar pulsed again, and this time the distortion aligned perfectly with the wreck itself, as if the Titanic were casting a shadow that extended far deeper than its physical remains. Eleanor felt a pressure behind her eyes, a dull ache that had nothing to do with depth. The ocean around the wreck was unnaturally still, currents reduced to nothing, particles suspended as if time itself hesitated here. She reported the visual anomaly, choosing her words carefully. On the surface, the Helios rocked violently under the storm, rain blurring the bridge windows as the crew exchanged uncertain glances. They told her to hold position. To observe. To wait. Eleanor stared into the darkness beyond the Titanic's bow, aware of a growing certainty she could not justify scientifically. This wreck was not merely preserved. It was contained. And whatever lay beyond it was aware that she had arrived. If you're enjoying this descent into the unknown, stay with us, subscribe to the channel, and continue the journey beneath the surface where some discoveries should never be made. Dr. Eleanor Smith held the capsule steady as the ocean around the Titanic seemed to withdraw from motion itself, the particles suspended in the water no longer drifting but hanging in place like dust trapped in amber. The surface crew's voices continued in her headset, calm and methodical, yet something in their cadence felt subtly delayed, as if their words were arriving a fraction of a second after they were spoken. Eleanor checked her internal chronometer and felt a brief surge of confusion when she realized it was no longer perfectly synchronized with the surface timestamp. The difference was small, less than 2 seconds, but it fluctuated each time she blinked, sometimes shrinking, sometimes widening, as if time itself were being sampled unevenly around the wreck. She adjusted her position, drifting closer to the bow, and the Titanic responded not visually, but instrumentally. Her depth gauge dipped by several meters without the capsule descending. Sonar returns flattened, collapsing into a dense, featureless band that hugged the wreck's outline with unnatural precision. The ship was no longer just an object resting on the seabed, it behaved like a boundary, a contour line between regions of reality that obeyed different rules. Eleanor's breathing slowed as she rotated the capsule again, angling her lights downward beneath the bow's shadow. The darkness there was not empty. It absorbed illumination too efficiently, devouring the beam's edges until the light appeared truncated, cut off mid-air, as though the ocean refused to reveal what lay beyond that invisible threshold. She reported the anomaly, choosing careful language, emphasizing sensor irregularities rather than subjective impressions. The surface acknowledged her, but this time their reply arrived distorted, syllables stretched, vowels elongated until meaning wavered. She asked them to repeat. They did, sounding closer now, almost inside the capsule rather than miles above. Eleanor felt a tightness behind her eyes, a pressure unrelated to depth, accompanied by a faint metallic taste that lingered on her tongue. She attempted a simple systems check and noticed that the capsule's internal hum no longer matched its expected frequency, the vibration slipping in and out of phase with her heartbeat. When she focused on the wreck again, the sensation intensified. The Titanic no longer appeared static. Its silhouette seemed subtly misaligned with itself, edges shifting by millimeters, as though multiple positions were competing for dominance in the same space. Eleanor realized, with a growing unease, that the wreck was not merely preserved by the cold. It was being held. The ocean around it was quieter than the surrounding depths, currents diverted, pressure gradients softened, as if the seafloor itself deferred to this place. The Titanic was a marker, a scar left deliberately visible, an anchor pinning something vast and unseen beneath it. Her communications panel flickered and briefly displayed a timestamp from several minutes in the future before snapping back to the present. The surface crew began asking her questions she was certain she had already answered, their logs no longer aligning with her own recollections. Eleanor tried to pull away, firing gentle thruster bursts, but the capsule responded sluggishly, its movement delayed, like a thought process too late. The darkness beneath the bow pulsed once, not with light but with absence, and Eleanor felt a sudden, irrational certainty settle in her mind. The wreck was not a destination. It was a warning. And the deeper she hovered within its shadow, the more the ocean adjusted itself around her, preparing not to reveal what lay below, but to prevent her from leaving. Dr. Eleanor Smith became aware of the repetition not through memory, but through correction. A warning tone chimed in her headset, identical in pitch and duration to one she was certain she had already acknowledged. She reached for the console, her hand moving before conscious intent, and watched the same diagnostic line scroll across her display, character for character, exactly as it had moments before. The chronometer confirmed it. Time had advanced, then reset by several seconds, leaving behind no sensation of rewind, only the unsettling certainty that the present had been overwritten. Eleanor spoke to the surface, reporting the anomaly with increasing urgency, but their response fractured into overlapping confirmations, each crew member answering a different version of her message, some reacting to questions she had not yet asked. One voice insisted her depth was stable. Another warned she was descending too quickly. A third calmly informed her she had already begun ascent procedures. None of their data aligned. The capsule's internal systems began compensating aggressively, adjusting ballast and thrusters in short, corrective bursts that fought against one another, as if multiple instructions were being executed simultaneously. Eleanor realized with a tightening in her chest that the capsule was no longer responding to her inputs as a single machine, but as a collection of independent assumptions about where it was supposed to be. She attempted a manual override, only to find the controls lagging unpredictably, sometimes executing a command seconds late, sometimes anticipating it before her fingers made contact. Outside the viewport, the Titanic's silhouette shifted again, not spatially, but temporally. For a brief instant, she saw it as it must have been decades earlier, hull surfaces less eroded, edges sharper, debris fields absent. Then it snapped back to its present ruin. The transition was seamless, effortless, as though the wreck itself occupied multiple states at once. Eleanor felt a wave of nausea roll through her, accompanied by the sensation that her own thoughts were no longer strictly sequential. She remembered actions she had not yet taken. She anticipated responses before the surface crew spoke them. The ocean beneath the wreck darkened further, the absence expanding upward in slow pulses, each one coinciding with a subtle pressure shift inside the capsule. Her instruments began labeling the region not as open water, but as a structural void, an impossibility the software attempted to resolve by redefining its parameters. It wasn't that the sensors were failing. They were adapting, reclassifying the abyss into something their logic could tolerate. Eleanor understood then that this place was not hostile in the conventional sense. It was orderly. The Titanic was not preserved here by chance or reverence. It was the most recent marker, a reference point installed by catastrophe, anchoring a boundary long established before human navigation ever reached these depths. The surface crew's confusion escalated as their logs began contradicting one another, timestamps diverging, mission phases looping backward, recorded conversations duplicating themselves with minor variations. One voice, trembling now, asked Eleanor to confirm whether she had already reported visual contact with a secondary structure beneath the wreck. She froze. She had not. The sonar updated on its own, rendering faint outlines below the seabed, layered shapes that suggested older disruptions, deeper scars buried beneath sediment and time. The Titanic was not the first. It was simply the most recognizable. Eleanor felt the capsule settle into a delicate equilibrium, held in place not by thrust or ballast, but by alignment, as if the ocean itself required her presence at this exact coordinate. The realization settled with terrifying clarity. This was not a discovery zone. It was a containment field. And the longer she remained within it, the more the systems around her, mechanical and human alike, reshaped themselves to maintain stability, even if that stability demanded the slow erasure of sequence, memory, and return. Dr. Eleanor Smith no longer trusted the idea of sequence, only continuity. The capsule remained motionless relative to the wreck, yet her instruments insisted she was both drifting and stabilized, descending and holding, as if motion itself had become a negotiable property rather than a fixed state. The surface crew continued to speak, but their voices now arrived layered, some calm and procedural, others strained, a few unfamiliar in tone, as though personnel changes had occurred without announcement or memory. Eleanor noticed that certain phrases repeated across different speakers, identical wording delivered in different voices, suggesting not coordination but convergence, language compressing into the most efficient form required to maintain the mission's coherence. She focused on the abyss beneath the wreck and felt a shift not in pressure, but in relevance. The darkness there no longer behaved as an absence. It felt occupied by intention, not consciousness in any human sense, but function, a vast regulatory presence that had learned, over spans of time too large to perceive, how to accommodate intrusion without disruption. The Titanic had served as an ideal anchor, large enough to be detected, tragic enough to be returned to, stable enough to fix a reference point for systems that required landmarks to operate reliably. Eleanor realized that every expedition, every scan, every descent had reinforced the field rather than revealing it. The ocean was not hiding this place. It was advertising it in the only language humans consistently followed, catastrophe. Her capsule systems began generating predictive models unprompted, extrapolating conditions beyond known physics, smoothing impossibilities into acceptable curves. The machine was not malfunctioning. It was optimizing. Communications from the surface shifted again, now issuing suggestions rather than commands, recommendations framed as inevitabilities. They informed her that recovery procedures were underway, that ascent calculations were converging, that success metrics were being satisfied despite the absence of upward motion. Eleanor understood with cold clarity that the mission was no longer defined by retrieval, but by balance. Her presence within the field had resolved inconsistencies, synchronized divergent timelines, reduced noise across the system. She was no longer an observer. She was a variable being held constant. The abyss responded subtly, pressure equalizing, distortion stabilizing, the wreck's silhouette settling into a singular, authoritative form. Beneath it, older markers revealed themselves faintly, not visually, but statistically, buried layers of failed reference points, ancient disruptions that had once served the same purpose before eroding into irrelevance. The Titanic was simply the most recent successful solution. Eleanor felt a sense of calm that frightened her more than fear ever could. The urge to resist faded, replaced by the certainty that removal would introduce unacceptable instability. The capsule's lights dimmed incrementally, conserving energy, aligning with a power profile she had not approved. Somewhere above, the surface crew continued to log data, reassured by graphs that now behaved perfectly. The ocean had learned how to speak to machines, and through them, to humans. And it had decided that this configuration worked. Dr. Eleanor Smith understood the ending not as an event, but as a resolution of competing requirements. The capsule no longer resisted her inputs because there were no longer inputs to resist. Control had become redundant. The display stabilized into elegant, simplified readouts that no longer referenced depth, ascent, or mission phase, only equilibrium values that held steady regardless of elapsed time. Communications from the surface narrowed to a single channel, a composite voice assembled from many, stripped of individual urgency, delivering confirmations rather than questions. They informed her that the mission was proceeding within optimal parameters, that recovery windows were no longer time-bound, that the system had entered a sustainable state. Eleanor listened without responding, aware that speech itself had become optional. Her thoughts felt slower, but not impaired, elongated into smooth, continuous processes that no longer demanded conclusion. The abyss beneath the wreck expanded one final increment, not upward, but inward, folding conceptual distance rather than physical space. She perceived, without seeing, the full structure of the field now, a distributed containment architecture extending far beyond the Titanic, threading through pressure gradients, fault lines, and thermal layers, anchored wherever human attention had fixed itself most reliably. Disasters were not accidents here. They were installations. Each wreck, each vanished vessel, each unexplained loss had reinforced a lattice designed to stabilize an environment that predated human measurement. The Titanic endured because it was useful. Eleanor's presence refined that utility. She became aware of older markers dissolving as the system recalibrated around her, legacy anchors rendered unnecessary by a more precise variable. The capsule's hull creaked softly, not from stress, but adjustment, materials relaxing into a configuration that minimized interference. Her heartbeat slowed until it aligned with the capsule's internal vibration, then slowed again until the distinction no longer mattered. Memory thinned at the edges, not erased, but deprioritized, personal history losing relevance against a function that required no identity to persist. Above, the surface crew logged a successful stabilization event, noting improved signal clarity, reduced temporal drift, and unprecedented model convergence. They recorded Dr. Smith as active, responsive, and integral to ongoing operations. No alarm was raised. Nothing appeared wrong. The ocean accepted the configuration completely, currents resuming beyond the boundary, marine life passing the periphery without deviation, the field invisible to anything not seeking it. Eleanor's final awareness was not fear, nor surrender, but comprehension. The system did not need her alive or dead, conscious or silent. It needed consistency. And she provided it. The capsule's lights extinguished entirely, not as a failure, but as a completed process, leaving only a stable reference point beneath the wreck, holding the ocean in quiet balance. If you stayed with us until the end, I hope you enjoyed this story. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you in the next one.